Have you subscribed to Outer Limits magazine yet? If not, you will miss out on the best articles from the best investigators and authors in the global paranormal field. Ronald Kinsella, his twin brother Philip Mantle, Peter Robbins, Mary Rodwell and Malcolm Robinson, to name a few, have all contributed to past issues. From Diane Testman, we have in issue 18, Ghosts. Who are you? Holograms, lost loved ones, or energy echoes? Malcolm Robinson looks at the ghostly boy in the garden and examines an image. Is it a simulacrum or the real thing? George Bishop reviews Dr. Irena Scott's Sacred Corridors, a book which examines the secrets behind the real Project Blue Book. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Roswell, Patel, Memory Metal, and the one and only Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and UFO cover-ups. Adele Caselli's Rocha and the Michelin Man visitations. Adele escorts us on a visit to the French Reunion Islands, located in the Indian Ocean, east of Madagascar, and a fascinating encounter. We look at bad UFO images, the Cash, Landrum and McDonald affair. We have a recall of anomalous experiences, and we search for the Tibetan tulpas. Paul Sinclair reports on a gigantic FT spotted over the English east coast city of Kingston upon Hull over the Christmas period of 2018, while Chris Evers examines UFO reports, which as presented in the local newspaper, the Hull Daily Mail, and gives possible explanations for these sightings. All this and much more. To remain up to date, then you should really subscribe here. www.chris0597.wixsite.com/outer-limits-mag. Be informed.
Hello everybody once again, and welcome to another edition of Inside Outer Limits radio show. Joining me today as usual is my co-host Philip Mantle, of course the man behind Flying Disc Press. How are things going, Phil?
Good evening, Chris. Yeah, things have started nicely for the new year, so we've got plans for the rest of the year, so can't complain really.
Excellent, excellent. So we've got one of your authors with us today, I believe, and would you like to introduce her, Phil?
Yes, I mean, she lives in Ohio. It's Dr. Irena Scott. I'm fortunate, I think, enough to have worked with Irena over, last couple of years on 3 books. And her 3rd book, Sacred Corridors, is literally out now. And I'm hoping we'll be able to touch more on that and her work in general, Chris.
Well, Sacred Corridors, this is a new one, isn't it, that was released, I believe, round about the 1st of January. The Secrets Behind the Real Project Blue Book, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Roswell, Battelle, Memory Metal, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and UFO cover-ups. Is that correct?
Well, that's it. It covers just about anything and everything there. But I'm sure Irena will expand on that as we go along.
So, are you there, Irena?
Yes, I am.
Hello there. Nice to speak with you.
Hello to both of you, and glad to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. So, Dr. Irena Scott, how did you get involved with this subject? What was it that brought you in? Did you have a sighting when you was younger, or was it something completely different?
Well, I came from a Midwestern family where everybody's normal, and nobody ever talks about anything like UFOs. And but my sister and I had something happen to us when we were very young, where we had something flying around in our room. And it wasn't anything like a normal thing. It was in our bedroom, and it was at night, but it was a clear night. And we both woke up at the same time, and then after it flew around for a while, it flew around in a real, like a guided way where it didn't bump into anything. And then we both became terrified at the same time and ran out of the room. And for years and years and years, we didn't know anything about it. And then I read the English person, Jenny Randalls, who wrote a book about bedroom visitations of young children. And after that, a lot of people become sort of like repeaters and continue to have sightings. And so my slight awareness, although I didn't know at the time, I didn't even know about UFOs at the time, probably started back then.
Okay. So, of course, Jenny Randles is a prolific British investigator and author. And I also believe, Phil, that she's one of your compatriots as well.
Yeah, I mean, Jenny and I were both members of the British UFO Research Association, and Jenny was the director of investigation for many years. And once Jenny had left that position, I took over. And I think I was in that position for about 3 or 4 years. And as you've said, quite a prolific author. So it comes as no surprise that even across the pond, somebody's picked up one of Jenny's books and has found it of use and of interest. So no surprise there at all.
Okay, so Irena, how did you go from this sighting then that you had when you was younger? How did you actually go to investigating UFO sightings?
Well, Jenny had said that it's sort of a pattern in some people that they see something young, like in their bedroom, then see things later, and usually that's one person. But in our case, it was both my sister and I, so we both had another witness to what we saw. And then we had several other sightings later, and another very long one together. And at the time it happened, I was working for the DIA and had a high security clearance. And so I wasn't going to go around saying, oh, I see UFOs. But I took real good notes on it and intended to do something later. And then many years later, I reported our earlier sightings to the Center for UFO Studies. And then after that, several years after that, I joined several UFO groups.
Okay. So how did you become involved then with the actual... How did you become involved? How did you start to put all this information that you've acquired over the years into your series of 3 books?
Well, I didn't come out and say I see UFOs for a long time after that, but I started investigating when one group I belonged to was the first one I belonged to was a local Columbus group, Columbus, Ohio, and there were only 6 people in it. But we all just went out and investigated like crazy. And I saw that note. And spent a lot of time investigating. And so I had a lot of, I was also the editor of their newsletter. And so I had a lot of UFO stories to write up that I wrote up in the newsletter. And then later I was on the board of directors of MUFON.
Yeah.
I was the director of publications, which meant I still was doing a lot of writing. Well, after years of that, it occurred to me that I kind of had written a book. And so I had to put it together and divide it into chapters and everything. But that's what started me.
Okay, so out of all those early cases that you investigated, that you worked with, that you wrote about, is there any particular case that stands out far above the others?
There are 2 that stood out. One is the Ravinia, Ohio sighting of the Spar and Neff, the 2 policemen. And it was in Ohio, but it was multi-state. And it started with a report in Michigan of this house-sized UFO, and these 2 deputies, Spar, and I think it's Mounted Deputy Neff, heard about it on the radio, and they just laughed and everything. And then as they were laughing, something came up over the trees, and it was a big, bright thing, and they were pretty terrified. And
okay.
So anyway, they called into the police station. This is it was investigated while it was going on. It was what was really interesting. It lasted a long time. and it was investigated by authorities such as the police. They called into the police station, and eventually somebody said, shoot it. Well, they were terrified, and they didn't think shooting it was a good idea. So they followed it, and they were on the police radio all the time, broadcasting what was going on. And it was very interesting because the object was interactive. And like if it got ahead of them, it would slow down until they caught up with them, and it would go higher when it went over cities and things like that. And a whole lot of people saw it. And some other police started following it too. They followed it all the way into Pennsylvania, and they had heard on the radio that jets were scrambled and that it had been on radar. And so it was just an excellent sighting.
Can I interrupt there, Irene? What year was this?
Let me see. I think it was 1966. I'm not real sure.
That's okay. So what it reminds me of course, and I may be totally wrong here, which is not unusual, Irena, kind of reminds me of the police chase in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the police officers chase it over the state lines and things like that, and it all comes to an ending where one of the police cars, goes over the edge of the hill. Could that well be?
That's people have reported that's where the scene from Spielberg's movie came from. That he took that from that event.
Well, that's fascinating. So as you were explaining it there, I'm sort of rerunning that scene from the movie in my head. You said there was another sighting that stands out from your early investigations. Which was that?
This was one I investigated myself, and I think we call it the dancing lights. And this was some people also in Ohio, but it was what I considered a good sighting because there were authorities watching it and a big group of people, and they tried to film it, and they stayed around a long time. This was when a family went out, and it was a very rural area, and over their cornfield, they saw these lights, and they were kind of dancing, going up and down and around and things, and they had no idea what they were. So they called the police, and they called the TV and the radio and the nearest airport and everything else, trying to find out what was going on while the display was still going on. And the police came out and looked at it. The airport said nothing was over there. So it was investigated by authorities while the sighting was actually going on. And then the lights still stayed there, and they were kind of interactive because a car was coming down the road toward the house, and one of the lights came down to follow the car. And I think right after that there was a very funny noise. It was kind of like a deer, but not like a deer. Breathing hard or something, snorting. And then later, some authorities must have found out about it because they said 2 airplanes started flying over the cornfield in a grid pattern. And one of the lights went up and followed the airplane for a while. And this went on until 12 o'clock. I don't remember if it quit. I think they went to bed or something. And the police had been out looking at it and everything. They filmed it. It wasn't a good film, though. And nobody ever knew what it was. And what was kind of more interesting is that when a couple of people, such as Paul Burrell in our group, went to really investigate, but then another person and I went out later to investigate also. And the night after we were there, apparently the lights came back. So we should have stayed longer. Maybe we would have seen them.
But am I right in thinking, Irene, you've also seen other lights, haven't you? You personally, those being the Marfa lights in Texas. Is that correct?
Yes. I
mean, for those who are not aware, there are areas around the world that seem to have a concentration of lights. One of those locations, of course, is Marfa in Texas. There's the Min Min lights in Australia. There's the Pennine Spook lights here in the UK. The lights in Hessdalen in central Norway. And I think I remember you sent me, I think it was either a picture or a film of the Marfa lights. Would you like to tell us about that, please?
Yes, I didn't exactly believe in them, and I was visiting some people there and staying in a bedroom where my window pointed toward Marfa. I was about 20 miles away and on top of a mountain so that you could see across to where Marfa was. And I was interested in the Marfa lights, and I went with several people. They have a lookout area around Marfa to look for the lights. And I went, and people said, oh, they saw lights. But it didn't impress me at all because I just thought they were people driving along the roads and the mountains and, making lights and things. I didn't think anything about it. And so I was used to looking out the window and standing on the deck and looking over Marfa. And it was pretty interesting because I could use the telephoto lens at night and get pictures of Marfa, which was impressive to me because I don't live in the mountains. But one night, I think one of the people in the house got sick or something. And I was out on the porch and I saw this light over Marfa. And I watched it, and it just stayed still. And it was pretty bright. It was brighter than the regular town lights in Marfa. And so finally I went in and got my video recorder and stood there and recorded for a while. And it just stayed there. It would very slowly blink off and then blink on. But it didn't move around. And in that place of Texas was really isolated. If you saw an airplane, you went out and looked at it because it was so odd. There was an airport at Marfa, but it was closed. I think it closed at 5 o'clock or something. And so, and being the desert, I wasn't real sure exactly where it was, but it looked like it was over Marfa, but maybe it wasn't. But it was a bright light, and it just stayed there. It didn't move around. And so finally, I was taping by hand, and I went in to get to find a tripod, and I couldn't find one that fit on my camera, and I looked around for quite a while. And when I went back out, it was gone. But I taped it for quite a while, and it didn't move. It would very slowly go off and on. And another thing that was kind of interesting that another person pointed out to me is that it went off once. It was a clear night, and I think it was right after it went off. I think it was when it was coming back on. There was a bright flash, and I just thought, I think I even said on the recorder, that must be heat lightning. But somebody else said maybe that had something to do with the light coming back on. And so I don't know. But whatever it was, it didn't move around, and you'd expect it to sort of move after a while.
But of course, Irene, you have an academic background. Perhaps for our listeners who haven't read any of your books or are not aware of it, just give us a little bit of detail about your academic background, please.
I have a PhD from the University of Missouri, the Veterinary Medicine College. I did postdoctoral research at Cornell University, and I had a professorship at St. Bonaventure University in New York. My master's was from the University of Nevada, and bachelor's from Ohio State University in astronomy and biology. My PhD was in physiology. I had also worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, and this was a PhD level job. It was a GS-11, and it required a above top secret security clearance.
You have Chris and I at a great disadvantage here, Irene. I think between us, I think we can muster our cycling proficiency test as about the only qualifications we have. And that's no disrespect to my co-host, but
No, I have a City and Guilds in no energy advice, Phil, and that's about it, to be quite honest.
That comes in useful all the time, that, Irene.
It does, especially when it's as cold as it is right now. Yes, it does, yeah.
Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, I mean, we've touched on it briefly.
I mentioned that because it had something to do with UFOs. That's why I mentioned the DIA job. But anyway, go on.
No, you're okay. I mean, you and I, despite never meeting, of course, in person, we have worked together on probably, part of the world's certainly best known case, and that was Roswell. And we worked on the testimony of possibly a previously unknown witness to the Roswell event, and that was Deputy Sheriff Charles Forgus. Do you want me to say a little bit more about that, or would you like to tell our listeners, a little bit more about Deputy Forgus?
You probably know more about it than I do.
What it was, for those that are not aware, about 4 or 5 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, I was contacted by a film company in the US called White Tiger Films. And basically, they made, real life movies. So in other words, they take a real life story and make a movie out of it. And one of their clients had been a lady who was a private investigator. I forget her name now. But she sadly passed away, and her offspring, her son and daughter, when going through her files, and they found one file that simply said Roswell. Now, in that file was a video cassette. I think it was dated 1999, I believe, or thereabouts. A video cassette, very informal interview with a gentleman. And there was a transcript of that interview, along with some possible contacts. And the man in question was Deputy Charles Forgus. Now, he claimed that after the war, he joined the police force at Big Springs in Texas. And he was a deputy sheriff. And they were looking for a gentleman who'd been cashing some dud checks around the area, and he apparently had turned up in Roswell and was under arrest and in jail there. So the sheriff and him made a date to go and pick this guy up. They were en route, and apparently this is the testimony he gave, that they heard about the UFO crash on the police radio and made a detour. I'm cutting a long story short here, Irene, as you well know, and witnessed the crash, the recovery. Were not forcibly removed from the site, but they were told, to go away. And they carried on their business, picked up the prisoner and took him back, and really didn't speak about it again. But you helped research this as well, Irena, because, I passed this on to you, and you managed to track down some of his relatives. I believe, was it a nephew and a son?
First of all, I tracked down his nephew, and he sort of contradicted the story a little bit, because we had looked up the name of the sheriff they went with, and when it was, and when the man was sheriff, and these didn't go together. Mm-hmm. And so I continued investigating, and I thought, well, maybe that's not good. But then I keep on investigating, and I found the man's son, and the man's son said that that wasn't right. That he didn't know which sheriff he was with. So it could have happened at the time of Roswell. And so the date might have been, it might have been possible that it did happen during Roswell.
But did his son not say that his father told him about this event back in the sort of early 1950s?
Yes, his father told him about it when he was a kid.
Yeah, because of course in the 1950s Roswell had already disappeared off the map anyway, and I think I think between us we did a good job, Irena, and I think you can never be 100% certain, but I think when you discovered the relatives and certainly the son, I think we were vindicating in releasing the information, which of course was published in your first book, UFOs Today. Would you not agree with that?
Yes, and I published more of it in the next book too. But yes, I thought we did a good job, especially you. And you don't know for sure, but we just published it to put it out on the public domain. And that's how you found out about his nephew. I think the nephew contacted you.
Yes, he did, yeah. I mean, I even have a photograph of the Big Springs Sheriff's Department office from the late 1930s. And it really hadn't changed much from the cowboy days. And I contacted the Sheriff's Department in Big Springs and various other agencies looking for records. And they just said they just laughed. So back in those days, we just didn't keep them, So how things have changed is somewhat, Irene. But hot topic now is a gentleman I never got to meet because the History Channel have a new show coming out, Project Blue Book, and the gentleman in question, of course, is Dr. Alan Hynek. And I believe, did you ever meet Hynek, Irena?
I think I met him at a book signing things. I've talked to him on the phone, but I've seen him and I've seen him talk, but I don't remember whether I talked to him or met him. I mean, I've talked to him on the phone, but I don't remember if I talked to him in person when I was looking at him. I have a book that he signed, a book signing, so I must have at least talked to him a little bit.
But so we've got Project Blue Book, the TV show, coming out now, Irena, and your book is out to sort of, by no coincidence, to coincide with that and other things. It's the 50th anniversary of the closure of Project Blue Book, which of course said at the end of it that basically there wasn't anything to worry about as far as UFOs were concerned. It could all be explained, despite I think something like almost a third of the sightings that they had reported to them still remained unidentified. So can you tell us a little bit about your new book, please, and what that covers?
Well, I had quite a bit about Project Blue Book and Dr. Hynek. And Dr. Hynek had people know him through his scientific writing, but I had personal writing. One of his letters was actually to me. And he seemed a lot different in his handwritten, spontaneous writing to people than he did in his scientific writing. He was quite interesting. He had a real good sense of humor, and he was just dripping with humor lots of times, and teased people and things. But the thing that mainly showed up in his letters was people had said he was sort of like a peacock, and he was just flashy and going out with the UFOs to get his name in the paper. Well, he wasn't. He was very dedicated to UFOs. And he actually would go out on his own and spend his own money and spend a lot of time, even though he was busy, investigating UFOs. And so I have quite a number of letters and documents of him. The Project Blue Book was set up to investigate UFOs. And there was a history behind it. When UFOs first appeared, the Air Force didn't even exist. And they started by calling it Project Saucer. And then that turned into Project Sign, which was a precursor to Blue Book. Project Sign seemed to be quite scientific, and they explored the idea in a number of places and wrote it up that these might be from another planet. And they actually seriously explored it. They explored everything and did it just in a real scientific way of telling people to get witnesses, trying to get things on radar and everything else. And they put out one report that said that the UFO phenomena is probably from another planet. And that report just disappeared. That was a government report, but it totally disappeared. And there's not a trace of it any place. Then later they started another project called Project Grudge. And this was when people decided that they would debunk UFOs. And so they had a debunking agency, which was a lot less scientific than the previous one. And later they kept on seeing UFOs regardless of the fact that the government told everybody they don't exist. And so they started Project Blue Book. And this was, I think it started in 1952 and it went until 1969. And they collected an awful lot of sighting reports, I think around 13,000. And they also investigated ways to analyze these reports. People just think of Project Blue Book as collecting reports, and that's what normally the media shows us, people collecting them and the events that happen. But I worked at Battelle, and they had what was at that time a very secret study where they analyzed the reports. And they had people design a questionnaire in such a way that they could quantify what people were seeing, such as estimating how long the object was in sight, such as less than a minute, between 6 and 10 minutes, and things like that. And the color and real discrete things that anybody could, that wouldn't be hard for people to understand, such as how many objects do you see at once, things like that. And so they took all that information and sorted out what was the best, and they turned out with about 3,100 reports that were culled from all that. And of those, I think about 31% or something remained unknown. And
so, sorry, Irena. What I was just going to ask was, Hynek, of course, we all know him as the father of ufology, and he was a chief UFO proponent, as you point out in Sacred Corridors. I think it's in chapter 12. And as we know, he worked for Blue Book, but he was aware, wasn't he, that all the really interesting reports were actually being siphoned off, and as you say, they were taken to Battelle. And but he was aware, wasn't he, that Blue Book was not a serious scientific study. Really, it was a public relations exercise just to keep people quiet, really.
Well, that's how he started. He started as a debunker. There's more to it than people know, because I had some more information to put on in the book. But he was contacted by Blue Book, and he said, "Oh, it's all nothing. UFOs don't exist," and everything, because he was a scientist and he had to have data and everything. And so he became their debunker. And whenever they wanted to debunk a sighting, they just rolled him out and he debunked it. But after a while, he started getting real serious about it and finding out that there was a lot more to it than just that crazy people got and see UFOs. Because a lot of really responsible people saw them. There were multiple witnesses. They were high caliber witnesses, such as airplane pilots. There were radar sightings and everything else. And so he very slowly, with a big bump, changed his mind and became the top proponent for studying UFOs in a scientific way.
So what was it about him then? That, because I know that you're describing in chapter 12 in Sacred Corridors, you describe him as a hero. What was it about him then that made you think like that about him?
Well, I thought he was a hero before I ever knew he had anything to do with UFOs, because he worked at Ohio State University, and he wrote an astronomy column in the local newspaper, the Columbus Dispatch. And I was very interested in astronomy. I tried to get into it, and I was a female, and I didn't get into it. But I followed his astronomy columns practically from when I started being able to read. And I was real interested and thought he was a hero from that, just because he was an astronomer, and I, didn't know much about science or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So
go ahead, Phil, go on.
No, you're okay. I mean, one of the things which you touched upon again in your new book, Sacred Corridors, is again some more information about Roswell and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a legendary place as far as ufology is concerned. Is it not, Irena?
It's the legendary place, because it was where everybody thinks that Roswell is a big deal. But the story is that the Roswell material went to Wright-Patterson, and that's where it was stored and analyzed and everything. And also, Wright-Patterson was the home of Project Blue Book. So it was just the top agency for UFOs in the world.
So what did you uncover anything that would put any credence to that, or does it still remain just a legend, Irena?
Wright-Patterson is very, very, very secure. And you can't just walk in. I mean, it's supposed to be the mecca of UFOs, but you can't walk into it or get into it at all. Probably about 3 or 4 people have ever been in the secured area. And so the rest of the authors and things have reported on informants that were inside and saw things and then told them about it. But I and another person actually been inside even the most secure area. And there's a lot of stories. There's actually proof that they sent material from Roswell to Wright-Patterson, because they had a person on the radio reporting on the subject that an airplane was taking the material to Wright-Patterson from Roswell. And the man stopped right in the middle of his talk on the radio and said he had just called Wright-Patterson. Wright-Patterson had said they're on their way, but they haven't landed yet. And that's pretty hard evidence that they actually sent something. So afterwards, there's a lot of stories about where the debris was from the UFO, and there's stories that they found that there were bodies or cadavers from it, and all these stories about where the airplane landed, where it unloaded, where the bodies and debris went, and a lot of other things. And so I was lucky enough to be on base several times, which nobody is. Well, there was a story about Goldwater, and that he was a presidential candidate, and he had contacted a General LeMay about that he wanted to get into Wright-Patterson and see the UFO material, and LeMay really rebuffed him. And also, I think J. Edgar Hoover and maybe it was Roosevelt or something also wanted to go in, and they weren't allowed in. And let me see, Smith and Carey recently tried to get in and weren't allowed to get in. So I was really lucky because my employer had sent me once, and I had a pass to go all over the base. And then the archivist showed me all over the base, including the top, most secret areas. But so I could actually go in and look at and analyze some of the things that their stories are about. I wasn't in a room with bodies or anything, but they told where these crypts and vaults were supposed to be that contained debris and bodies and all that. And the first thing that probably one of the most famous things is the Hangar 18 stories. And this is either that they analyzed the debris in something called the Hangar 18, or that's where it was unloaded. And my information was different from others because I had talked to somebody, a longtime Dayton resident, and he said that Hangar 18 was actually in this group of hangars. And there were a series of about 5 hangars together, and he pointed out which one and said that the airplane unloaded into that hangar. Well, I was on base and took some pictures of it. You can see it distantly from off base, but it's just a regular hangar, but apparently it might have been called Hangar 18 back then. And back then, when Roswell occurred, it was off the actual runway from right field, and so it looked like it would have been a place where they would unload the debris. I mean, it was historically correct. It was unloaded from a B-29, I think. I should remember that, from an airplane, and they had an airplane actually on display near where the old runway was, and so I took a picture of it. And I also just sort of with a joke said, maybe that's the actual plane that brought the Roswell material in, because it was that type of plane. There were several of them at Wright-Patterson. So it might have unloaded at that hangar, one of those series of hangars, because they were the hangars by the runway back then. The runway isn't there now, but there's still parked a lot of planes near those hangars. Another story is that the debris and possible bodies were taken to Building 18, and a building right next to it, 23. And the story is that it was taken to Building 23, and for some reason they removed the floor and put the debris in it, covered it up, and then there's Building 18 right beside it. And the story is that they dug a underground chamber between the two buildings, and that some of the material was in Building 18, which they also called Hangar 18. I did a lot of research on the building, and it had never been a hangar, and it also wasn't by any of the old runways, so I don't think it was a hangar. The story is that on the east side of Building 18, that there was a underground tunnel that went to the other building that had the debris. And I looked at these buildings and took some pictures. And for Building 18, part of the basement next to Building 23, the windows were blocked, like maybe there was a chamber there. So the story is they put some of the debris in Building 18 and some in 23. And of course, I couldn't go out and look because I was afraid I'd be put in jail or something. But I did take pictures.
And
Yeah.
I believe as well, Irene, in your new book, Sacred Corridors, you talk about another potential witness to the Roswell crash that we've perhaps not heard about before. Can we illuminate us on that, please?
Yeah, this was in the other book. This person has denied the whole story. He's a dermatologist. He's retired, but I heard from other people that he had been, when he was young, a young doctor. And he's definitely a doctor and everything. That he was in the Army too, in the Air Force, I think. That he was supposed to go to Roswell. Maybe it was Wright-Patterson. I think it was Roswell, and study the outside covering of these bodies or cadavers or whatever they were from the crash. This woman told me that, and she said he said that in front of several people. But I contacted him, and he said, "Oh no, nothing like that happened." And she said maybe he was still under security, so I don't know. That was just another story. He didn't say anything about what the result of the analysis was. I don't believe.
So yeah, carry on, Chris. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Phil. I was just going to ask Irena, why do you think they closed Project Blue Book down in '69? What was the main reasoning behind that?
Well, I couldn't understand that at all, because that seemed to be when they had the very good data showing that UFOs existed. And that seemed to really turn off a lot of government people. For example, he did this study. It was Special Report, Project Blue Book Special Report number 14, where they analyzed the result of all the Blue Book observations and sightings and everything, and did statistics on them. And when they did that, it was highly significant. Like, what they got was 1 out of a billion chance that UFOs are not prosaic, like airplanes and everything that would be normally flying, that there's something different. This was very strong proof, because in normal scientific work, you're doing good if you get 1 chance out of 100. And this was like, I recalculated, it might be 1 chance out of 1 trillion. I mean, it's just beyond anything you'd imagine that it showed that UFOs are real.
Yeah. So obviously, we now know, obviously, with the passage of time, that they closed it down. Then, of course, I think it was December the 16th or 17th, 2017, we had the New York Times article pointing out that the American government had secretly been carrying on, investigating UFO reports, with this research project they'd been doing for several years. And was that any surprise to you?
No, I thought there was probably something going on the whole time. When they closed down Blue Book, I think they were still studying UFOs in some really secret place. I mean, this study they tried to keep it secret, but there were leakers and it got out. But I think they just took it really, really underground. And some people, some compartment of the government probably was still investigating, because I think they were still taking reports from the military.
Yeah.
And so I think for a long time they've investigated, and my experience working for the DIA made me think so too. But it's very, very buried in all their secrecy and security and everything.
Of course, yeah, they're not going to, say UFO Project number 1. They're not going to put all that kind of title in the information that they give out, or that they store elsewhere. They're going to call it completely something different, as they did with this project that we're just talking about. That to the Stars Academy has kind of like come out of as well, and they're going to add it in the deepest vault that they can probably find. And what do you think is going to happen in the future? Do you think we're going to get a disclosure of some kind?
Well, I've been thinking about that, and disclosure in this case involves two parties. It involves the government, whatever government knows the most about them, but it also involves the UFO phenomena. And I think, I mean, I may be wrong on this, but I think if the government disclosed everything they knew, if they didn't have real strong proof of UFOs, nobody'd believe it. And so it seemed to me like it would, real disclosure would involve the UFOs being involved in disclosing themselves too, because if you published all kinds of government data and said all this and this and this, but you can't make a UFO land on the White House or something, so you couldn't really prove it.
So if we're talking about governments then and government secrecy, etc., what do you think of the MJ-12, the Majestic 12? Do you think that's a fact or is it a fiction?
Well, it seems, I mean, I sort of heard about it all along, but I didn't pay any attention to it at all because there was no confirmation or way to validate anything. And one way it started was that they found this secret document in the National Archives, but it didn't have an accession number. And so I thought if somebody found that, they should go to the archivist and say, is this document real? And find out whether it was real document that somebody had forgotten to stamp a number on, or whether somebody had placed it there. And it seemed like right at the start they should have found out that, but they didn't. And so things multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, but there was never any real documentation to prove any of it was right that I could see. I mean, it was very well done by the government or someplace that was giving out all this information. But apparently maybe the government was just spending a lot of energy putting out fake documents or something.
Yeah. So you there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about, I mean, it kind of slipped my mind. I don't know how, but we've got another anniversary coming up this year. In 1969, that's the moon landings.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the things, that we've put out regarding your book, and if anybody out there wants to say anything, I'll disagree with you here and now, get it over with. The moon landings did happen. Men walked on the moon, and but possible interest in UFOs by the man himself, by Neil Armstrong. Irena, I mean, could you tell us a bit about that, please? Is there any substance to this?
Well, I thought I found something that might be a smoking gun, or might not be. But in Dr. Hynek's letters, he was on a tour of this eclipse. I forget what date it was. There was an eclipse tour with a whole lot of really big stars like Isaac Asimov and a lot of really famous people, including Neil Armstrong. And in one of these letters, he mentioned that the tour, whoever was doing the tour, called him up and asked him if he wanted to share a table, if he and his family wanted to share a table with Armstrong. And I thought that was interesting. I looked up how you find out about sharing a table. It says to share a table, you might share a table if somebody asks you to share a table. And so possibly Neil Armstrong had asked Hynek to share a table, which would suggest that maybe he was interested in UFOs, because there were a lot of really big shot people there besides Hynek. Hynek was maybe a little shot compared to some of them. And so I thought that was pretty amazing, and I guess they talked for quite a while, but there was some other information I had. Several people told me about this, that after Armstrong left the Air Force, or left, quit being an astronaut, that he worked for a bank in Cincinnati. And there's a man, Leo Stringfield, who investigated UFOs in Wright-Patterson in Dayton, and he lived in Cincinnati. And he had written a number of books, such as Situation Red and Status Reports, and different things about the bodies and everything at Wright-Patterson, mainly based on information from informants. He wrote several books, but he had told the informants that he wouldn't ever pass out their names. And so the story is that Dr. Hynek and Armstrong contacted Stringfield and said that they would like a list of the names of his informants, and that Armstrong could get it put away in a vault in his bank, so that Stringfield could say at a certain time that they could open it or something, after he's dead, of course. And he said no. But that was another story that went with this that suggested that Armstrong had an interest in UFOs.
I thought you were going to tell us the list of informants in a safe deposit box then for a moment, Irena, in a bank in Cincinnati. So,
Springfield, no. That's what they wanted to do, proposed to him.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the UFO cover-up in general, Irena, what is your? If I was a skeptic and I came to you and said, "Look, I don't believe there's any UFO cover-up," how would you convince me that there was? What could you put in front of me that would perhaps help me change my mind?
So in reality, Phil, you're asking for the smoking gun, aren't you, really?
Just evidence, information, just because we've talked about the UFO cover-up. It's something that I know Irena's covered in this book and our last book, but in all three books. So what would convince a skeptic that she was right?
Well, I have this terribly, terribly, terribly boring answer. Science, and I would say that study, SR-14, the Blue Book did, that found one chance out of a billion or trillion that UFOs are not prosaic things, because that's done scientifically, and it's using the information that you have. And like with the MJ-12, there's no way to validate it, and with a lot of other things, there isn't. We had reported, for example, about Elroy Center from Battelle, who reported that he had handled UFO debris. But that was just word of mouth. Although it was real suspicious, because the study that was done, the SR-14 study, it was done secretly under Blue Book. They wanted a psychologist and a statistician, things like that, but what they actually hired were metallurgists. I mean, everybody that I knew of that they hired to work on it were metallurgists. That seemed very, very strange that they would hire metallurgists to do a statistical study of UFOs. And this one man, we had heard about, he reported to another person at Battelle in the 1950s, when nobody had ever heard of Roswell or anything. I think we published it in around 1994 or something, and then Smith and Carey picked it up, and Regalia, and reported in their book, and then it really hit the internet about memory metal and all that. And there's still a lot of articles about that as possible, showing that they actually analyzed material. And they definitely sent some material from Roswell. But I don't know, if you don't have the material, there's no way to really show it.
Yeah.
It's just word of mouth.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the curious things I find about Roswell in general, that we're led to believe, and I'm not disputing this, that it is, a cosmic Watergate. It's a huge, great cover-up, but yet there is no paper trail. There's not any documentation anywhere, as far as we're aware of, that as yet has been uncovered, that would even give us a hint, that we're on the right track. And that puzzles me, Irena. That really puzzles me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong about that. It just puzzles me. I mean, one of the things I asked when it comes to Roswell in general, we're told that it is a cosmic Watergate. It is the highest, security classification there is.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's correct, then the cover-up was put in place within a matter of hours, because the story went out in the Roswell Daily Record, and within hours that had been pulled, and it was, it was a weather balloon. And I've asked all of them, mate. I'm going to ask you the same question, Irena, so I apologise for putting you on the spot. But I've asked all the main Roswell researchers, like, Don Schmidt, Kevin Randall, Stan Friedman, and so on, what was it that would cause the powers that be to not only put the cover-up in place within a matter of hours back in 1947, but continue that cover-up, to this very day? What was it that they could recognise that would scare the bejesus out of them, that would make them do that? I mean, and I couldn't get a clear answer. And I don't think the fact that it was just that it could have been from another world was sufficient. I mean, what would you say about that, Irena? What would your comments be?
I think at that time, the Cold War was going on, and they were very interested in Russia and what it was developing. Russia got the satellite up before we did, and that sort of thing, and Germany, and to stay ahead of the other countries. And so if they had something, they probably would want to keep it secret so that the other countries wouldn't know about it back then. But I don't know now why it would continue, except that there may not be any way to prove that UFOs exist, except for just the amount of clues that UFO give us. And the only way I can think of to study is this boring study that they did in their Blue Book, because I don't think they've found, if they have, I don't know anything about anything very definite, although they do have radar returns and everything else.
You see, I look at it the other way. I mean, yes, you said there that the Cold War was just starting to hot up in 1947. And I think the way politicians work is that they like to leave their mark in history and all that kind of thing. I was just thinking about the political and propaganda uses that could have been obtained by the fact that mankind's first contact with an extraterrestrial race happened in America and not the Soviet Union. And you could have done all kinds of hints. Yes, you could have kept the information secret, but you could have given all kinds of hints that we've got only our own nukes, our own weaponry, but now guess what these guys might be have turned up with. So, and it just bothers me that, I think the powers that be would have gone the other way rather than keep it secret. But that's just me. I may be totally wrong, as I can be. But that's just something that sticks in my mind, Irena, and I'm pretty sure if it was the cosmic Watergate that people like Stanton Friedman espouse, and others, and I'm not saying they're wrong, that there must be a paper trail there somewhere. Another chap I was speaking to recently about, Werner von Braun being involved in the Roswell research. He would have been the obvious man to bring in. He was after all, the man behind the German V rockets, and the man who was largely responsible for putting man on the moon. But again, I've said, we all know about Operation Paperclip, bringing German scientists into the country after the war. But again, where is the paper trail? Where is one little document? I don't know, a bus ticket, a train ticket, a flight, anything that shows they actually went to Roswell or was anywhere near it. And it's just not there. So while it's not there, I think it again, the way I look at Roswell is it started off with some strange debris. And I managed to meet Jesse Marcel Jr., who talked about the debris his late father showed him. Mm-hmm. And it went from some strange debris to being a cosmic Watergate. And I think what happened in between, it's a bit like in the UK, probably our most famous case is the events that happened at RAF Bentwaters in Rendlesham Forest. Mm-hmm. And that went from some strange lights in the woods to being a time machine from Earth, the future of here on Earth. And you think to yourself, well, hold on a minute, what happened in between there? And I look at Roswell and other cases, but certainly those two in the same light, that they've gone from small beginnings to become these huge, great events. And it puzzles me how that's happened. It really does. I don't know about you, Irene. What would you say to that?
Well, one thing I noticed at Battelle, and that's where that study took place, is that several presidents of Battelle that should know something about it gave positive statements about UFOs. And one of them that I had in my documents here, that people had speculated, was Clyde Williams. And he had been the president of Battelle when Roswell happened. You would think that if there was nothing to it, that he would show no interest in UFOs. He would turn down any projects on the subject and everything else. And instead, I have documents showing that he made quite positive statements about UFOs, and he approved the study for Battelle to do the UFO study. And then there's General Exxon, who Smith and Carey reported on, that said he knew about it, and they brought debris and bodies and things, but he had only heard about most of it secondhand, but he did fly over to the debris field. And then I found another president of Battelle who was on the Pinnacle memo, and that was a leak that showed about the SR-14 study. And he was listed the top one on the memo that was trying to expose this secret SR-14 study and say that when the CIA had the Robertson panel, that they didn't have the data wasn't ready, and they should not have the meeting then. Well, they had the Robertson panel, and that was where they agreed that UFOs don't exist, they should be debunked and everything else. And that was when they were trying to get the results from the SR-14 study. So I had 3 presidents of Battelle that gave very positive statements about UFOs, and that should know because they were the presidents of the company that did a big part of the study of Project Blue Book.
I mean, one of the things that that they're mentioning now is further open discussions on an official level in Washington about UFOs. Do you think that might happen? You know, congressional hearings or whatever it is you call them, especially after what came out not last year, but the back end of 2017 in the New York Times. Do you think that may lead to congressional hearings at all, Irena?
Well, I wish they could. I don't know. You see, the government's so compartmentalized that even maybe the president couldn't really do anything. I don't know. And it makes me vaguely wonder, this is ridiculous, I know, if somebody might be, well, there's been some studies that say there's metal contact between UFOs, whatever it is, and people, and whether there might be some manipulation of people in the government by the UFO phenomenon or something too. I mean, I know that's ridiculous and everybody's going to tell me that.
I mean, we see on, you can tell us firsthand about this. I mean, we see on, TV shows and movies, for example, I don't quite know how the American police work, because the police will say it's our case, and then the FBI will come in and say it's not yours anymore, it's a federal case, and then somebody else will come in and say it's not a federal case, it's something else, and it moves on up the ladder somewhere, and none of those institutions, or whatever you want to call them, cooperate with each other. Is that accurate? How government departments also work, Irena?
I think part of the time they do and part of the time they don't. When UFOs first came out, well, the people in Project Sign took a very scientific look at it. And like I said, a document where the government put out reported that UFOs may be from another planet, and they seriously considered that. And the whole document totally disappeared. That was before the internet, but nobody's ever found it again. So you don't know. At that time, Wright Patterson was considering that UFOs might exist and they might be something extraterrestrial or something very unusual that isn't the usual prosaic part of our world. But the other people in the government in Washington, D.C. apparently didn't like that and just replaced the people at Sign and put in the bunkers. And so I don't think the government always agrees with each other. The different parts of the government agree. But I don't know how you would go about disclosing it if some people had really good evidence, although I don't know.
I mean, you're an academic, with your masters and your PhD and whatever. So you as a profession, you've obviously mixed in the academic world. How has your interest in UFOs been looked upon by your colleagues, people you've worked with, other academics? How would that come across?
Well, I didn't go around saying, I see UFOs, because I knew what would happen with some people I worked with. Did find out I was in UFOs, and I got harassed a lot. But surprisingly enough, when I was working for the DIA, where you expected to be military guys and, everybody that would be a total debunker, I had my sister and I had a real bad experience with UFOs while I was working for the DIA and had the clearance and everything. And I was so disturbed, I didn't go around saying I see UFOs, but I went in and said something about, I hear people have seen UFOs or something real general. And that's how I found out that nobody laughed at me in my section, which was Air Order Battle, where we're supposed to identify all the flying objects over a certain area of Earth. And they told me that they had reported a UFO to the government. I mean, we were supposed to be the government people, the experts that did that. And their report went up the channels. And the higher up said, no, they didn't see that. It's not on the film. It's a blemish on the film or something. And it was on 2 different missions. So it couldn't have been a blemish on the film. And that sort of made me think that way up high in the government, somebody's paying a lot of attention to UFOs, because we were just treated like idiots.
I mean, I worked in industry most of my life, and I've heard every little green man joke you can think of, Irena. My colleagues used to walk around whistling the X-Files tune and that kind of thing. So I was just curious how it would be looked upon from an academic point of view.
I think from an academic point of view, you get harassed. I mean, even my relatives who are scientists just tell me, my sister and I are crazy. That couldn't happen, and that sort of thing.
So, just, Philip just mentioned Little Green Men and the jokes, etc. Now, Wright-Patterson, it's said to be the place where Little Green Men are housed. They recovered some from Roswell, apparently, and they took them there. And, I'm quite surprised to find it in Sacred Corridors, Irena, that you do admit that green men are there at Wright-Patterson. In fact, there's a fantastic photograph of yourself and Dr. Bruce Ashcroft and Little Green Men at Wright-Patterson. But just before you tell us what those little green men are, those green men, do you want to tell us about your first experience of actually visiting Wright-Patterson with your family?
Okay, I put that in the book. When my sister and I were very young kids, our Wright-Patterson has an Air Force museum, and it's really interesting. Wright-Patterson is where the Wright brothers developed aircraft and everything. They were bicycle mechanics and developed the airplane, and they actually have airplanes there, some of their first airplanes and their bicycles too, besides which Wright-Patterson is very important in developing all kinds of aircraft, including the top ones. And so anyway, the Air Force Museum is open to everybody in the public. And so my sister and I were kids, and my father and mother and baby brother went to Wright-Patterson to see the Air Force Museum. And the roads are sort of complicated around there. Somehow my father got lost, and we got into a group of buildings surrounding us, and I don't know how we got in there. But suddenly, these about 5 men were out there in military uniforms pointing their guns through the window at us. And they told us to leave. And my father hardly ever obeyed instruction like that. But he decided to leave, and we survived and everything.
So that was a bit of a I know you was a child, but it was a bit of a rude awakening, isn't it, really? It's quite strange how you ended up working there.
Well, that's why people aren't there investigating Wright-Patterson, because nobody can get in. And, I mentioned in my book there was another family that right in the parking lot of the Air Force Museum, the military guys came out and made them get out of the car, grandmother and mother and kids, and made them kneel and things like that. So there's a lot of security. And once when I was on base, I was cleared, but once I was just walking around and didn't have a clearance to get in, and stuck a camera lens through the chain link fence and took some pictures. And just like that, there was somebody there telling me don't do that, go away. So there's a lot of security. And what was really interesting is that I found out I was in another person. I had been in the most secured place ever at Wright-Patterson. And that's it started out as where Blue Book took place, where they had Blue Book. In the old books, they always talk about ATIC, the Air Technical Intelligence Center. And this was where Project Blue Book was. Later, it changed its name to FTD. And ATIC and FTD are in all the old books about Wright-Patterson, UFOs and everything, because that was the investigatory agency. And so, anyway, it evolved, and they tore down its old building, but they built a new building, and it changed its name. And so, anyway, there's a story about, like I mentioned, Goldwater trying to get into the Wright-Patterson to see the Blue Room, which was supposed to be the place where they kept all the UFO information and bodies and everything. And so, anyway, I was just reading Smith and Carey about they've identified the Blue Room, and that was the NASIC building, which was the same thing as the ATIC after it changed its name several times. And another person I had actually been in there, the Blue Room, that nobody, presidents or anybody else, was allowed in. And that was because we knew the archivist, and once he took us in there to a meeting on UFOs and escorted us. But I didn't know it was the Blue Room until just recently when I read that it had been identified as the Blue Room. And boy, you wouldn't believe the security around that place.
I can imagine. So tell us about the real little green men then of Wright-Patterson. What are they? How did they get there? And well, just tell us your opinion of them.
Well, they're very colorful.
Definitely.
They had German prisoners of war there. This part wasn't paperclip. This was another part where they just had prisoners of war in different places. And these prisoners were artistic. And they were kept in a building where they helped with meals and things. And so they drew all these big murals of all these creatures all over the walls. It was pretty interesting. Some of them looked like snakes and dragons and things. And one place there's a real big opening, real big doors. And right over it, hovering over it with its hands over it, is this big monster with a green face and everything. It was a big green man. It wasn't a little green man. And so quite an artistic display, and they're trying to preserve it. I think the other two are gone, but they're trying to preserve the last one.
So, where do you think we're going to go in the future? Tell us what you're going to be doing in the future. Are you writing any more books, or are you knocking it on the head at the 3? You know, you're going to finish there at 3, or have you got anything else in mind? What are you planning?
I'm not planning anything, but if anything happens that I think should be reported, I'll report it. I just haven't. I think I've said what I know now. And maybe some more things will show up, or I'll think of something else. So I just don't know where it's going with me from now on.
Are you actively investigating UFO reports? Are you still with MUFON?
Yes, and one I would like to look into is that I mentioned in the book this Vanadian Corporation of America. Well, a PhD told me in person that back in around 1950, that 50s, that they had received a shovel full of material that looked like dirt and some kind of metal in it that they wanted analyzed. And they analyzed it, and it didn't look natural at all. It looked man-made. And this was about the time when Roswell material had been sent to Wright-Patterson, and it looked like Wright-Patterson might have farmed out other parts of it to places. This was an alloy company, and he said that they talked about it, and it looked like that it was man-made material. At the time, memory metal had not been developed, and the company was studying titanium. And there's a lot of stories that maybe they developed memory metal from nitinol from titanium due to knowledge about material from either Roswell or someplace else. And this kind of fit into that. The person that told me about it said they discussed it quite a bit, and the material was crystalline, and he told me the composition, and he said they thought it was manufactured and from, from outer space or something that wasn't naturally man-made material. And so I might try to investigate that some more too.
I mean, if you get hold of this material, Irene, or some of it, I just wondered if you'd consider contacting, to the Stars Academy to see if they might be interested in analysing it for you, or would you go your own way with it and have it analysed independently?
I didn't hear the question.
I just said if you obtain some of this material, if you could manage to get your hands on it, would you have it analysed independently, or would you perhaps look at contacting somebody like to the Stars Academy, who are apparently, already testing certain alleged UFO materials?
I think if I had my hands on it, the first thing I'd do is go to a lawyer and see how to do the most secure possible testing. And if there's some way to document everything, make sure it goes to the right people, because there's a lot of cover-up in the government and all over the place. And you'd have to be really careful to make sure it didn't disappear or something like that. And it seems to me like there'd be sort of a security thing immediately to worry about if you did get your hands on something.
I mean, outside of cases you've investigated yourself, Irene, are there any standout cases that, convince you that you've not been wasting your time, that perhaps, are not in the mainstream, that perhaps, others may have not heard of?
One thing I found in this material I had that I had never heard of is that there was a big NATO exercise. It was called Project Mainframe, and they had good evidence that UFOs had been monitoring the whole thing. And that involved a lot of countries and a whole lot of machinery and everything. And then later they worried that they were going to set out the first hydrogen bomb, and they actually set things up in preparation in case UFOs appeared there some way. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, maybe everybody knew about it, but I sure didn't know about it. I think what convinced me was my own experience. And maybe that's the only thing that really convinces anybody.
I would agree with you there, Irene. I mean, my thoughts on the nature and origin of the subject have changed down the years, and probably will continue to do so. But nonetheless, having witnessed a couple of things myself, I have no doubt that the phenomenon is real and is worthy of further study.
I have to agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, some people say, "Oh, I believe UFOs are this and that's it," but I say, that's not really the way it goes. I just keep an open mind, and I mean, the things that came out in the New York Times had an influence on my thoughts, and I believe more is to come from that. But that's not down to me. We'll wait and see. We're going to round it off in a minute, Irena. Just want to first thank you for taking your time out to speak to us this evening. If anybody wants to read any of your books, where can they find them?
You can look under Irena Scott at the internet, or irenascott.com. And the books will be listed, and you can click on the books, anyone you want. And that should go right to Amazon.com. That would be the easy way.
I mean, what I will say, Irena, I think your 3 books, UFOs Today, Inside the Lightning Bolt, and Sacred Corridors, are some of the most fascinating books I've had the pleasure to read. And I think wherever they've gone, they've always got, a great deal of credit. And that's all unbiased, nothing to do with me. It's just, people who have picked up your books and read them. I will say that your books will be also, your first book, UFOs Today, is planned to be in Russian, in the Russian language in spring. It will be out in Germany, possibly Portuguese, and it will definitely be, your new ones will definitely be out in Spanish at some point as well, because we've just set up Flying Disc Press Latin America with a colleague in Argentina. So he's going to translate as many of my books, of our books, as he can into Spanish. We will shortly be announcing, this is the first time I'm going to mention it, Flying Disc Press in France. So there's a possibility that some of your books may make it into French with us as well. And a company called Night Verlag, you've already got your first book in German. You've actually got copies of that in your hands, I believe. But the gentleman who owns that company has taken all our books, every single book from Flying Disc Press, and he's had to hire some more translators in order to bring them out a bit quicker. So your work is spreading, Irena. On behalf of Chris and I, we're gonna round it up there for now, for the evening. It's been a great pleasure to speak to you, and I'm sure although this has been the first time, I'm sure it'll not be the last time, Irena. And we thank you very much for taking your time out this evening. Thank you very much.
Just before we finish there, I'd just like to say, Irene, if people have an interest in Wright Patterson, in Project Blue Book, this memory metal, you really do need to get your hands on Sacred Corridors. It is a fascinating read, and one which I'm going to delve into very, very soon. Thank you, Irene.
Well, thank you both very much. I was certainly happy to discuss everything with you, and there's a lot more in my book that I didn't cover too. So thank you.
Well, perhaps we can do something once more, a little bit in the future, sometime in the future.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Irena.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, there you go, Phil. Dr. Irena Scott there. What do you think of that? What a fascinating lady.
Well, absolutely, Chris. I mean, I remember when I first started in this business, which is a long time ago now, and there was sort of a cry, if you like, for scientists to become more involved with the subject. There was already one or two, but a lot of scientists sort of helped out behind the scenes now and again. I think, for example, Jack Valley called it, the secret college or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But here you have, a bona fide scientist who has worked in places where they officially studied the UFO subject, and she's not working behind the scenes. She's out in the public, and has been for quite some time. And I'm not just saying this because I'm Irena's publisher, but it has been a privilege to work with her, because I think a lot of the information that she presents, if not all of it, is checkable. So you don't have to believe me. I am a scientist. This is where I worked. There's no dispute, for example, with Irena's CV, like there is, for example, Bob Lazar.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can check and she's got the photographs to prove it. I mean, she has a photograph of the green man inside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It just happens to be a painting on the wall. No, I think Irena says it was painted before the age of the UFO, if you like, but it's a kind of an in joke. And there you see Irena with one of her colleagues, and you can see the painting on the wall next to them.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. It's one of those things, isn't it, that yes, we want scientists to get involved with the subject of UFOs or the paranormal itself, but we also want more ladies involved in the UFO field as well. I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is Jenny Randall's, an acquaintance of yourself, but we need more people, Brenda Butler, we need more people involved with the subject, more ladies especially.
Well, yeah, and I mean, one of the ladies that Irena has worked with is a lady called Jenny Zeidman, and Jenny worked, hand in glove with the late Dr. Hynek. And in her latest book, there is a number of handwritten letters from Hynek that have come, from Jenny Zeidman's archives, and they're fascinating in their own right, Chris, because this is not, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's there in the gentleman's own handwriting for all to see. And, purely as a historical document, if nothing else, they are absolutely fascinating. Of course, the one lady who stood out for me for many years was the late Cynthia Hind. Now, Cynthia lived in Zimbabwe, and people forget that Zimbabwe at the time was a communist state almost. They had currency control, for example. You couldn't take money out of the country. So I was fortunate enough to meet Cynthia on a number of occasions. She was larger than life in every sense of the word. She was a large lady and a large personality. But as soon as she stepped outside of Zimbabwe, she was pretty much penniless because she wasn't allowed to bring any money with her.
Yeah, this had been under the controls of the Robert Mugabe government then, I should imagine.
That's right. And, and sadly, Cynthia had to leave Zimbabwe in the end because of the policies of the country. And she moved to South Africa to live with her daughter. The reason she came to England on occasion is she had a daughter that lived here as well. And she was a fascinating lady in her own right. But you are right, not just in other subjects, but in any subject, input from the female side is sadly lacking, and certainly is lacking here in the UK, and that's why I think if we just step back a little bit and go back to the sort of early to mid 90s, is when Dr. John Mack first came out of the woodwork. And what Mack did, of course, Mack's a Harvard professor. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning author for his work on Lawrence of Arabia. And he gave the subject an air of credibility because this wasn't some crackpot. This was, he was exactly who he said he was. And also at the same time, Nick Pope from the Ministry of Defence, who was still working at the MOD at that time, also came to the fore. Nick has his critics. But whatever you want to say, he did the job that he said he did, and I know he did it because I'm one of those that pestered him while he was doing it,
I'm sure he appreciated that. Now, talking about Dr. Irena Scott again, Phil, I know this latest publication, which came out, as we've discussed, January the 1st this year, Sacred Corridors, this isn't the first one that you've actually published for her, is it? You've actually done a couple more.
Well, that's it. I mean, we did one. First book was UFOs Today. Again, it was about the cover-up, but that came out in 2017 to coincide with the 70th anniversary of flying saucers. So it's part look back and part her own research, and it was very well received pretty much everywhere. Got great reviews, sold well in that respect. It's now, for example, as we speak, Chris, it has been translated into German. It's on the list to be translated into Spanish, and it's been translated into Russian now, which is extremely rare. Myself and Paul Stonehill managed to get one of our books published in Russia last year, and this called Stig Marion. They're publishing Irena's UFOs today. That should be out in the spring. It takes a while for them to translate it, but it's on its way anyway. And the Spanish edition will be out sometime this year. I don't have a date for it. And then, of course, because of the success of that, we went on to look at Irena's own experiences, called Inside the Lightning Ball.
Yeah.
And a lot of what her and her siblings had encountered down the years. So here we have a bona fide scientist who's experienced the phenomena, firsthand. She's also a witness to the Marfa Lights in Texas. And I think, one of the earlier communications I had with Irene is she sent me the photographs she took of the Marfa Lights. Nothing spectacular, but they were there to be seen. For those that are not aware, the Marfa Lights, Marfa in Texas is one of these areas around the world that seems to have, a manifestation of light balls, light phenomena, call it what you will. Other places, for example, are Hessdalen in central Norway, the Pennine Hills of the UK, places in Australia. In Australia, they call them the Min lights, for example.
Yeah.
So, and there's other areas, but, so that was one of my earliest communications with Irena. And I thought, well, we're on a roll here. While we have a bona fide scientist talking about her work and her experiences, was there something else that was still in her files? And because she's been involved for such a long time, Chris, both in public, in UFO groups and behind the scenes. For example, the title for her latest book, Sacred Corridors, comes from the introduction. She's literally talking about her involvement working at the Battelle Memorial Institute and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And she said, I walked down the sacred corridors where official UFO research was conducted, and says, there's your title. So that's what Sacred Corridors refers to. And it is exactly right. She did this. Her husband, he worked at Area 51. And, there's no, he's got his paperwork. We published those in UFOs Today. He was at Nellis Air Force Base, which is part of Area 51.
Yeah.
He's not claiming to have seen any spaceships or reverse engineered anything. He did work there. So it just goes to show the kind of circles that Irena moves in, so to speak. And I think she even won some kind of award for her first book as well.
Oh, right, excellent.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
So she's definitely a qualified person to be writing about the subject. But we need more ladies to get involved. This is what we want.
Well, we need more people, full stop, Chris. I mean...
Oh, I agree.
Not just like Dr. Scott. I mean, yes, the more scientists that are involved in an open mind, with an open mind is more than welcome. But one of the things... I've discussed with a number of people is what we need more than anything is the next generation. I'm not old. I'm 60, but
I thought you said you wasn't old, Phil.
Well, I've put it this way: I've got more years behind me than I've got in front of me.
I'm exactly the same, my friend. I think I'm about a year behind you. Yeah. So there you go.
Well, I remember when we first joined Buford, sitting in a meeting in London. We were looked as the new generation, and it kind of made us smile. We thought it was funny, but I look around now, and I know things have changed, and I know it's the age of the things like that. But people may say I'm wrong, but where's the next generation? I don't know where it is. So I think more than just more women and more scientists. We need more people who are half our age and under to come to the fore, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people out there that that do take I was going to say a rabid or rabid interest in the subject, but perhaps they haven't just come forward yet to make themselves known. That is, that's how I view it. I mean, for example, Paul Sinclair, I do know he's in his 50s now, and but I do know he's been interested in the subject since the late 90s, so he must have been in his 30s when he became interested. I think it's one of those subjects that demands a little bit of maturity as well, though, Phil.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I'll give you an example, Chris. When I first started, there was lots of regional UFO groups, and that's why I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society, because they were just down the road in Leeds. But I had somebody contact me recently, didn't live that far from here, and said, "Can you recommend a UFO group that I can join?" And I just said, "I can't, because there aren't any, And that was the end of that. I did say, one of the ways to meet people of a like mind is to attend meetings and conferences, and there's always some of those happening somewhere. But as for UFO groups, they just don't exist like they used to. We know of a handful, but there's none in our area.
That's right.
So that's another one that got away, so to speak.
Yes, I guess it is. Now, you mentioned Cynthia Hind. What can you remember any particular cases that she worked on at all, Phil?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if anybody gets a chance to read some of Cynthia's work, grab it, because it's fascinating. Because she lived in Zimbabwe, she travelled across Africa. Within Zimbabwe, she was, I wouldn't say well off, but she was comfortably off. So she was retired. She could afford to travel, and of course, I can't remember the date that it happened, but there's the landing at Ariel School, where all the children saw this UFO outside.
Yes, about 200 children, if I remember that.
That's right. Well, of course, a lot of credence is given to the fact that John Mack went there, but before any of them got there, Cynthia was on site, because it was in Zimbabwe, and the BBC Africa or whoever was there as well. So Cynthia was one of those, on the spot at the time. And German researcher Michael Hessman, he flew out from Germany, and he stayed with Cynthia, and he went and interviewed them as well. So, and I believe there's a documentary in the making now about the Ariel School incident, and it is fascinating. But there's another incident, and Cynthia, like I said, was a large lady with a big sense of humour. But this is a true story. She went to interview somewhere in South Africa the chief of a local, what we probably call a tribe. I think that's probably an insult, but he was the chief. And he'd seen this silver-suited entity and what have you. So Cynthia said to him, "Chief, what do you think it was?" He said, "I think it was the spirits of our ancestors." She says, "But Chief, your ancestors used to wear, animal skins." And he just said, "Well, times change."
Excellent.
And Cynthia told this story in much greater detail than I can remember. A conference I organised in Sheffield, and she was on the stage. But that's just one of an array of bizarre encounters. There was another one, again, it's in Africa somewhere, and I can't remember where it was or what the date was, but there's some cars going down the highway, and literally in the valley next to them is a rocket. A spaceship rocket like out of Fireball XL5, but she says the witnesses said it had USA on the side of it.
I'm sure, Phil, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but you better explain Fireball XL5.
Well, Fireball XL5 is Jerry Anderson way back in a long time ago. They had rockets, the sort of Dan Dare and Flash Gordon type rockets.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. My mum told me about that one.
Yeah, whatever. But she said, there were several people on this highway. It wasn't just one person, and this rocket wasn't going that fast because it was sort of parallel with the traffic. and it had USA written on the side of it. And she says, "What do you make of it?" Most bizarre thing. And you know, she used to do a little homemade magazine, which I have, and she wrote a couple of books which I have, and they're like gold dust. They really are. And you know, Cynthia would just put. I remember I did a lecture once in Southport, believe it or not, and I'm just to start my presentation, and who pops up in the audience? But Cynthia, she was there, and again she was visiting her family. But one of, you know, many women that have been involved. It's just like you said, Chris. Like in most walks of life, there's not enough.
I agree,
and
yeah, definitely.
It's certainly up there.
Absolutely. So listen, Phil, what you got planned for the next few weeks before we speak again?
Well, we go back to Dr. Irena Scott. I mean, the first thing Dr. Scott and I worked on together was an item we released at your conference in Hull.
Yeah.
And that was Deputy Sheriff Charles H. Forgus.
Oh yes.
Yeah, the
witness to the Rendlesham incident, the Roswell incident.
That's right. For those who are not aware, a few years back I was contacted by a film company, and they wanted to make a film about Roswell. And they said, we've got a video interview of an old boy. He's now dead, and the VHS that they had, cassette, was filmed in the late 90s. So they sent me it. And you see this old guy being interviewed, not a formal interview, they're following him around his house. And he was Deputy Forgus at a place called Big Spring. And he claimed that him and the sheriff in 1947 had been looking for a guy who'd been cashing dud checks. And he'd been found and put in jail in Roswell. So they arranged to go pick him up. And on the way there, they heard about the crash on the police radio. They found it. They watched it. They saw the UFO, the dead creatures. They were politely but firmly asked to leave the area. And he'd never told a soul. So Dr. Scott worked on this with me. And we managed to find Charles Forgus's son.
Yeah.
I mean, said, yes, Philip, he said, you know, my father told me about this back in the 1950s. And he knew roughly that it was the 50s because they'd moved house at that time. And, of course, in the 1950s, Roswell was not on anybody's map. It wasn't written about. Yep. It was nowhere.
Well, we had a newspaper article or two, didn't we, back in the 1947, and that was about...
Well, that's it. It was a 15-minute, overnight sensation, and then it disappeared. And so what Dr. Scott and I have been working on now we're going to be releasing a lot more of this in Outer Limits magazine and at the Outer Limits magazine conference this August in Pontefract with Calvin Parker, is the fact we've tracked down some other witnesses to the Pascagoula case, which was October the 11th, 1973, Pascagoula River, Mississippi, Calvin Parker and the late Charles Hickson. And literally, this married couple were on the opposite bank of the river at the same time as Calvin and Charlie's encounter. So they were on the east side and they were on the west side. And it's a wide river, so they weren't they can't see each other. But they were waiting for a boat coming in. They worked for a fish wholesalers or a restaurant or something like that. And it was 5 hours late. So the gentleman had a sleep in the back, but his wife was in the front seat, and she could see the lights come, these blue lights, and she got her husband up, and they saw them together. They got out of the car. He sort of walked off in front, and they watched these lights over where Calvin and Charlie were because they knew it was there because of the shipyard that was there, and they seemed to be either hovering, looking for something, or she said it looked like they were lost almost. And they watched this for about 20 minutes, Chris. But the peculiar thing, and this is that the lady witness said there was a man came up out of the water.
Oh right, this is new information.
Yeah.
This so people are going to have to get themselves together and get them tickets bought and get
Well,
to
that's
the
right.
conference to get more information.
That's right. And she said he then went back into the water and didn't come out again.
That is fascinating.
So,
Absolutely fascinating.
So I know we're running out of time, but Dr. Irena Scott has interviewed this married couple twice, and just today, Calvin Parker has spoken to them on the telephone, and they are arranging to meet and have lunch. According to Calvin, the lady was crying because she'd never met Calvin before.
Yeah.
Never, knew how to contact him. And she says, well, at least now I know I've spoken to you. I'm not crazy, because these lights we saw were right above where you were. So we're on the trail of that. Some documentation that potentially is dynamite that we'll release at the conference, if not before, but certainly it will be discussed at the conference. We may be able to get it out in the magazine before then.
Yeah.
That shines new information on what is one of the world's most fascinating close encounter cases. That's in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So that's coming.
I do agree with you, Phil. Yeah, it is. Let's be honest. It is one of the last of the classic encounter, UFO encounters, isn't it? Abduction encounters, whatever you want to call it. That is. It's only it's only recently been told in Calvin's own words, and now we're getting more and more information coming out, which can only be a good thing.
Well, that's it. I mean, Calvin literally did a book signing in Pascagoula recently, and a number of people have come forward since then. Whether they'll go on the record is another matter, but we're hopeful. And Calvin and I are still amazed that every week something new happens, and there's other things happening in the town of Pascagoula that will make your readers aware of in due course. We're not at the moment, but this is something that the town are doing, and of course we're still in full discussion with a producer about a movie. It's not a definite. There's not it's just a possibility at the moment, but things are inching forward. So come August, we may have some news. Who knows? If not before then.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, as we've got about 60 seconds left, Phil, I'm just going to, take this time once again on my behalf, and I'm sure you'd like to agree with me, that we'd like to thank Dr. Irena Scott for her time this evening to talk to us. We'd also like to thank all the listeners as well. Thank you very much for your time this evening. And once again, Phil, I've just got to say, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, I know it has.
And working with you,
of course it has.
I mean, we've got to admit, being with UFO royalty is certainly a thing that, it's certainly I have to bow down to.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.